Hence, we were on Thrasymachus' concept of justice. And Thrasymachus concept of justice can be asked in the exam also. Fine. So what is Thrasymachus' conception of justice? So according to Thrasymachus, justice is the interest of the strong. Justice is the interest of the strong, and they can ask this in exam to comment on this view that justice is the interest of the strong. And there was some confusion in the doubt session. How come his theory is radical and his theory is conventional? Fine. So conventional theory, conventional means which is followed as a part of customs and traditions. Fine. So when Cephalus and Paul Marcus, they give the definition of justice, their definition of justice is better. If you find confusion between these two terms, better you call it as traditional. The traditional Greek conception of justice. And Thrasymachus' theory, you call it as a radical theory of justice. Radical theory of justice. And as you know, Thrasymachus is sophist. Fine. So sophists are the chief antagonists of Socratic tradition. Socratic tradition. Sophism versus Socratism. Okay. Now I will explain this point and then I will also dictate this. So Thrasymachus says that justice is the interest of the stronger. Fine. So what does this mean? It means that you should know who is strong. Who is strong? So answer is one who has power. Fine. Now who is in the power? The ruling class is in the power. Fine. So basically justice is the interest of the strong. What does it mean? It means that whosoever is in power. Whosoever is in power defines what is justice. Whosoever is in power defines justice. Fine. It also means that whosoever in power is in power will define justice as justice in his own interest. Fine. It means those who are in power they rule in their interest. Means not in the interest of the people. So the government passes the law in the interest of itself and not in the interest of the people. So it also means that what is in the interest of the people, it is in the interest of the people not to obey the law. Why? Because when they obey the law, they work in the interest of the king. But when they disobey the law, they work in their own interest. Okay, so first try to understand it. Fine. So first of all, when Thrasymachus says that, justice is the interest of the strong. Means justice is the interest of the ruling class. Fine. So when Thrasymachus says that justice is the interest of the ruling class, you should know that ruling class keeps on changing. For example, once in India, the Congress party in power, now BJP in power. So what is justice will be defined by those who are in power. Fine. So sometimes justice is what one set of rulers tell. Sometimes justice is what the other set of rulers tell. Fine. So it means there is no universal idea of justice. Fine. It means there is no universal and no transcendental idea of justice. Means there is no such idea of justice which is the ultimate idea, which is beyond the world of time and space. So all justice is a convenience. One very good example supporting the Thrasymachus theory of justice is the electoral bond introduced by the government. So, and after the electoral bond has been introduced, the data show a phenomenal rise in the contributions made by the people in BJP in comparison to the other parties, the amount of funds BJP has got. So this electoral bond that has been introduced as a scheme to benefit the masses by bringing the transparency and reducing the role of the money power in the elections. But we do not see this is happening. On the other hand, this has increased the funds for the ruling party. So whether the electoral bonds working in the interest of the people or the party in power, that is what the Thrasymachus is suggesting. And one government comes, it brings law, the other government brings its own law. For example, in the country, there is a debate on Uniform Civil Code. So according to Congress, maybe the Uniform Civil Code will be injustice to the Muslim woman, whereas according to the BJP, Uniform Civil Code will be justice with Muslim women. So what is justice? What is injustice? There is no universal idea. It's all a convenience. It all depends upon the who is in power. So the idea of right and wrong, the idea of justice and injustice, it changes with the ruling class. And because this change, that is why there is no universalism, there is no permanence in the idea of justice. This is what the Thrasymachus tells. Fine. So it means there is no idea of justice, and the entire debate which Socrates has started is useless, because either there is no idea, and as the Gorgias held that even if there is an idea, we will not be able to understand. Fine. So Thrasymachus' argument tells that justice is conventional rather than universal. One word has different meanings. So justice is conventional rather than universal, and it will change from time to time. Okay. Next, you see that the sophists always taught that money is a source of power. Money and power is a source of happiness. So according to them, our objective should be to earn money. How we earn money doesn't matter. There is no just way of earning money, and there is no unjust way of earning money. And the best thing is, if you are in power and you earn money by whatever means, whatever you do, it becomes right. Fine. So what is important in this life is not to have the knowledge of idea of justice, rather to have money and power. Fine. And second, they say that man is a measure of everything. So what is important is the interest of the individual. And if individual thinks that I am earning money at the cost of the society, but that money is making his life better, there is nothing wrong into that. So this was the idea of Thrasymachus. it is difficult to understand the argument of Thrasymachus. It was even difficult for Socrates to counter the argument of Thrasymachus. So you just write. I am not giving it right now in the form of question and answer. I will give you step by step meaning of this so that you understand Thrasymachus' statement. And then I will give you Socrates' statement, and then you will have to include both in your answer. Okay, so now write it down. First write, no, you can write notes on Thrasymachus idea of justice. Notes on Thrasymachus idea of justice. So first of all write, who is Thrasymachus? Write in your copies, who is Thrasymachus? In your copies you write, Thrasymachus is a sophist. Thrasymachus is a sophist. Underline sophist. Next you write, who were sophists? Who were sophists? Right? The main antagonists or the chief antagonists of Socratic thinking. Right? The chief antagonist of the Socratic thinking. Okay? So next, let us understand what were their key ideas and what was the basic difference between their idea and the Socratic idea. Is that point clear? So first, next paragraph for your understanding, though you already know, but to be able to understand the answer of this question, let us have the step-by-step clarity. Fine? So you write that sophists were teaching the rich, teaching for the sake of money. Right? Hence, they were teaching the rich class. Right? Since they were teaching the rich class, they were telling them that money and power is the source of good life. They were telling them money and power is a source of good life. Okay. Next point you write, the two prominent sophist scholars were. The two prominent sophist scholars were. First write Gorgias. Fine. Write Gorgias is known for skeptical nihilism. Skeptical nihilism. Though we have done all these things, yet to understand Thrasymachus and relate, we will have to again relate is skeptical nihilism. Right? It means they don't believe in any universal value. Universal value. They don't believe in any universal value. Fine? Right. Thus, from this perspective, what is right and what is wrong is relative. Right and wrong is relative. Okay? Right. Thus, Gorgias had the particularistic approach. Thus, the Gorgias had the particularistic approach. Fine. So there is one debate between Socratic tradition and sophistic tradition, particularism versus universalism. Fine. Second point you write, second scholar you just write is Protagoras. Right. Protagoras held that man is measure of everything. Man is measure of everything. Fine. This can be interpreted as first. Right? What man thinks is important rather than what God thinks. What God thinks. So what God will like is not as important what man likes. So man is a measure of everything. Man is God. Fine. And man will decide what is right and what is wrong for him. Fine. Second point. Man is a measure of everything. The second point means the interest of individual is prior to the interest of the society, state, or collectivity. Interest of the individual shall have priority over the interest of the society or the interest of the state. Fine. So if you think that your self-interest is served by earning the money by any means, by fair or unfair, there is nothing like fair or unfair, go ahead. You need not to bother about the society. Fine. So you have written this. Next point you write, thus for sophists, society is not natural. Thus for sophists, society is not natural. Society is conventional. Society is conventional. Means society is, right, it means society is created by the man. Fine. It means society has created by the man. Fine. It means, you have written society is created by the man. It means man has a priority over the society. It means man has a priority over the society. Fine. because creator is always prior to the creation, because creator is always prior to the creation. This is the point I will reconnect when I will discuss Aristotle. Fine, that society is natural or society is artificial, and there is one famous statement of Aristotle, man is by nature a political animal. That time I will again connect this point. Okay, so keep this perspective of the sophist scholars in mind before studying, before writing Thrasymachus. Fine. So now you write just the notes. Explanation of justice as the interest of the strong. Explanation of justice as the interest of the strong. So here, first of all, you write point number 1. Right, according to Thrasymachus. According to Thrasymachus, justice is the interest of the strong. Justice is the interest of the strong. Underline this, the strong. Right. The strong means who has power. The strong means who has power. Underline this word, who has power. Right? It means the ruling class. It means the ruling class. Right? Thus, whatever the ruling class tells is justice. Whatever the ruling class tells is justice. Okay? Right, next point. Next point you write. Write, as the ruling class will keep on changing. As the ruling class will keep on changing. For example, in Athens, there was a rule of monarch, aristocrats, and then democrats. There was a rule of monarch, aristocrats, and democrats. Okay, right. Next point. Whichever ruling class came to power, whichever ruling class came to power, it defined its own interest. It defined its own interest as justice. It defined its own interest as justice. Okay? Now you can understand with a contemporary example. Fine? Right? For example, freedom of speech and expression. For example, freedom of speech and expression is right and justice in democracy. For example, freedom of speech and expression is right and just in democracies. However, in totalitarian societies, freedom of speech and expression may be a crime. In totalitarian societies, freedom of speech and expression is a crime. For example, what is just in China? Is unjust in USA. What is just in USA is unjust in China. It means the nature of the government, the nature of the regime shapes the idea of justice. It means the nature of the regime or the government shapes the idea of justice. Is this point clear? So justice is the interest of the strong. Next point, right? Hence, the idea of justice is changing. This is the point I find you were confused. So hence, the idea of justice is changing. Idea of justice is changing. Fine. So idea of justice is changing means it is not universal. Fine. Next, it is not transcendental. Universal means it's not same everywhere and all the time. It is neither universal nor transcendental. Fine. So there is no, it means there is no absolute idea of justice. There is no absolute idea of justice. This will vary from society to society or state to state. This will vary from society to society and from state to state. Fine. Every state will have its own idea of justice. Write it down. This will vary from society to society and state to state. Fine. Right. It means the idea of justice is relative. It means the idea of justice is relative. The other word for relative is particularistic. Thus, the idea of justice is relative and particularistic. Fine. So it means the concept of justice. It means the concept of justice belongs to this word. Belong to this word because this word is a word of change. Belong to this word. It means the justice as a thing belongs to this word. In this word only justice and justice. There is no justice and justice in the word of God. Fine. Belong to this word. Fine. That also means that there is no absolute or perfect idea of justice. There is no absolute or the perfect idea of justice. And it may happen that the idea of justice of Democrats may contradict with the idea of justice of aristocrats. Fine. So it means justice has no relation with the kingdom of God. Means justice has no relation with the kingdom of God. So actually there is no kingdom of God. There is no divine perfect idea of justice. Even if you have that idea of justice, you cannot have it in this world, because this world is a world of change. Fine? Right. Thus the idea of justice is conventional. Fine. Conventional means here social creation. It is all the creation of the society. It is not divine. Here, when I am using the word conventional, I mean social in nature. There is nothing divine into it. To understand this, for example, women are inferior to men. Women should live in the custody of men. This is the idea, not the idea of God. This is the social idea. Men should wear this. Women should wear this. This is nothing decided by God. Rather, we have decided what men should wear, what women should wear. So men should wear blue, women should wear pink. There is nothing decided by God. It is all conventional. Conventional means the product of the society. Society's customs and traditions. And society's customs and traditions are decided by those who are in power. So conventional means social. Fine, right? Thus, what is justice? Thus, what is justice? Underline what is justice. Underline justice. It means, thus, what is right and wrong. Thus, what is right and wrong is determined by. Thus, what is right and wrong is determined by those who are in. Alright, thus, what is right and wrong is determined by the society. Thus, what is right and wrong is determined by the society. Fine, right? Since it is determined by the society, since it is determined by the society, we call it as conventional. We call it as conventional. I hope now the confusion is clear why I used conventional term, because according to Thrasymachus, there is nothing universal and transcendental. It is all conventional. This will vary from society to society. So the type of dressing the women do in US may be considered wrong in Iran. Fine, because it will vary from society to society, and we can never decide that which way of dressing is appropriate. Is this point? In that sense, I used the word conventional. Okay, and again write who decides the customs and traditions of the society. Who decides the customs and the traditions of the society? Again write the answer. Obviously, those who are in power. Obviously, those who are in power. Write the example. For example, homosexuality is wrong. Heterosexuality is right. For example, homosexuality is wrong. Heterosexuality is right. Is determined by those who have power. Is determined by those who have power. Underline this. Since heterosexuals are more in number, since heterosexuals are more in number, hence heterosexuality is seen as right. Fine. Right, next paragraph. Thus, there is nothing unnatural in homosexuality. Nothing unnatural in homosexuality. It is all conventional. It is all conventional. Have you understood this? So, justice is the interest of the strong. Next point you write, thus for Thrasymachus, it is important to earn money. Thus for Thrasymachus, it is important to earn money. It does not matter whether money is earned by the fair means or unfair. It is earned by the fair or unfair. Right? The reason is there are no universal standards. There are no universal standards. Fine? So one government will say this is fair. The other government will say this is not fair. Next point you write, thus from this perspective, a common man should obey the rule, or common man whenever possible, right? Thus from this perspective, a common man whenever possible should disobey the law. A common man whenever possible should disobey the law, because in that sense he serves his interest. In that sense he serves his interest, and when he obeys the law, he serves the interest of the rulers. Okay? Right, next paragraph. Fine. So in next paragraph, write, Thrasymachus challenges Socrates. Thrasymachus challenges Socrates with respect to the idea of justice, with respect to the importance of justice. Okay. Now, in your copies you write the response of Socrates, right? How Socrates responds to Thrasymachus. How Socrates responds to Thrasymachus. Write it down. It was not easy for Socrates to challenge Thrasymachus. It was not easy for Socrates to challenge Thrasymachus. Right? Why? Why not easy for Socrates to challenge Thrasymachus, right? Because whatever Thrasymachus says is true. Because whatever Thrasymachus says is true, right? In reality, everywhere we see this fact. In reality, everywhere we see this happening, right? We see that everywhere the ruling class is working in his interest. We see everywhere the ruling class is working in his interest, right? For example, if you take the example, for example, the army in Pakistan, for example, the army in Pakistan is ruling in its own interest. Army in Pakistan is ruling in its own interest rather than the interest of the people of Pakistan. Rather than the interest of the people of Pakistan. Fine. And if the army of Pakistan tells that India is an enemy, they are not telling truth to their people. Rather, they are making this rhetoric so that they remain in power. Or we can take another example. When the army of Pakistan is allowing China to build the CPEC corridor, it is allowing itself to be colonized by China. This may not be in the long-term interest of the people of Pakistan. Fine. So ruling class is doing what is in its interest, and that is true at the time of Plato, and it is true at the time of us. Fine. So it was not very easy for Plato to contradict Thrasymachus. Fine. So why it was not easy for Plato or Socrates to contradict Thrasymachus? Because whatever he was telling was actually happening. Because whatever he is telling is actually happening. Fine. Right. Hence Thrasymachus' concept of justice. Hence Thrasymachus' concept of justice is realistic or realist, right? Thrasymachus is realist, right? Thus, Thrasymachus give the realist view of justice. Thus, Thrasymachus give the realist view of justice. Fine. The realist view means, write it down, realist view means justice as it is. Justice as it is. What is realism? Telling the things as they are. So Thrasymachus is telling about justice as it is. Fine. And what next, right? What justice is. What justice is, right? In reality, justice is the interest of the strong. In reality, justice is the interest of the strong. Write it down. Thus, in reality, justice is power. In reality, justice is power. Fine? Right. In reality, justice is power. Again you write, in reality, justice is power means might is right. In reality, justice is power means might is right. Okay. Now you write the approach of Socrates. The approach of Socrates. Fine. The point number 1, Socrates is idealist. Socrates is idealist. Here, the idealist I am explaining not as an opposite of materialist, I am explaining as an opposite of realist. So Socrates is idealist. Fine. Here you write. Idealist means those who are concerned with what ought to be. Those who are concerned with what ought to be. O-U-G-H-T. What ought to be rather than what is. Rather than what is. Idealists are those who are concerned with what ought to be rather than what is. Underline this. Rather than what is. Okay? Again you write. What is justice? What is justice? What is justice? In reality. Fine. So, in reality, justice is the interest of the strong. Keep on writing. Even if there is repetition, it is like solving the mathematical and geometrical puzzle. Fine. So, what is justice? The answer is justice is the interest of the strong. Fine. Write it down again. Now write what justice ought to be. What justice ought to be. What is justice, though we know. What is happening in India, we know. Might is right. But whether it ought to be and whether this is not at all an important question, we know that there is a role of money and muscle power in the elections. What is India's election? The display of the money and the muscle power. This is fine to know what is. But don't you think it is also important to know what should be? Should elections be based on money and muscle power? Fine. So if you know what is, it doesn't mean that you should not know what ought to be. And you see this, that in reality might is right. But what does your soul says? Does your soul also agree to this theory that might is right? Or your soul says that no, right is right, might is should not be right. Who should win the case? Not who is powerful, but who is right. This obviously does not happen, but it does not mean that we should not think about this question. So what Thrasymachus says is happening. Might is right, but the question is whether it ought to happen. You answer it, whether justice ought to be the interest of the strong. Answer this question, whether justice ought to be the interest of the strong. So your eyes are saying might is right, but your soul wants that. Or whether justice ought to be might is right. Now the answer is no. Answer is no. Might is right is not justice. Might is right is the contradiction of justice. Might is right means then justice does not prevail. So if somebody says might is right is justice, it means that person is ignorant. And if I will ask my soul, I try to understand the real idea of justice, I will say that no, this is, but it ought not to be. There has to be a difference between what is and what ought to be. In the sophists, there is no difference between what is and what ought to be. But here, there is a difference between what is and what ought to be. Fine. So justice, might is right, it should not be. Fine. So right, hence the justice is what is right and not what is might. So the proper definition of justice is righteousness, right? Thus, the proper definition of justice is righteousness rather than power. Thus, the proper definition of justice is righteousness rather than power. And those who think justice is power, they are actually the ignorance. Fine. So, just write that for sophists, what is also what is also what ought to be. For sophists, what is also what ought to be, right? For sophists, there is no difference between what is and what ought to be. So what is justice? Power. What a person should do? Not oppose power, but acquire power. Fine. Now, the next thing is, if we talk about the Socrates, the Socratic position is what is need not to be what ought to be. For Socrates, what is does not mean it should be. Fine. So for Socrates, the question of ought is also important, right? For Socrates, the question of ought is important. Ought or should is important. Should is important, right? For Socrates, it is important to know what is, but it is also important to know what should be. For Socrates, it is important to know what is, but it is also important to know what should be. Fine. The reason is, if we do not know what should be, if we do not know what should be, it would result into status quo. It would result into the status quo. I recommend that all of you please look into the dictionary meaning of status quo, because in all classes many students don't understand what is a status quo. So status quo means things as they are. Fine. So status quo, it will result into status quo, right? Hence only when we know, and hence only when we know what should be, only when we know what should be, only when we know what should be, we can go for making improvements. We can go for making improvements. Okay? So idealism is forward looking. Realism is a status quo, understanding what is. Now, the next thing you just understand, right? According to Socrates, man is not the measure of everything. According to Socrates, man is not the measure of everything. Underline this, man is not the measure of everything. It means, according to Socrates, individual does not have priority over the society. According to Socrates, the interest of the individual does not have priority over the interest of the society or the state. Fine. To write next point, according to Socrates, whole is prior to part. According to Socrates, today's lecture, revise again because a lot of concepts are coming. Whole is prior to part. According to Socrates, a state or society will have priority over individual. A state or society will have priority over individual. State or society will have priority over the individual. Okay? Right. Just write the example of this. If we take the example of this, right? Socrates' life. Just write the Socrates' life and Socrates' philosophy. The Socrates' life and Socrates' philosophy are not different. Or you can write Socrates' philosophy was Socrates' life. Socrates lived for his ideas. Socrates lived according to his ideas. Fine. So write, when Socrates was given poison, when Socrates was given poison, comma, Socrates had opportunity. Socrates had opportunity to escape. When Socrates was given poison, Socrates had opportunity to escape. Yet he preferred to obey the law of the state. Yet he preferred to obey the law of the state. Fine. Hence, through his life, we can understand his philosophy. Through his life, we can understand his philosophy. Right? He believed that the state will have priority over individual. He believed that a state will have priority over individual. Okay? Next, write, according to Socrates, the good life does not mean life of an individual. According to Socrates, the good life does not mean leading a good life as an individual. Fine, right? The good life means how we live. The good life means how we live in harmony with the others. The good life means how we live in harmony with the others. So individually I am leading a good life, that has no meaning. Fine, the good and bad means I have a good life. My life is to be seen in context of the society as a whole. Whether as a member of the society, I am living in peace and harmony with the others. That is more important rather than just working or living as an individual. That is no art of living, that as an individual you have made a lot of money but you are not in peace and harmony with the others. Okay, so these are certain points of disagreement between the Thrasymachus and Socrates. So this question, justice as the interest of the strong, there is a lot of things to be written, and this question can show you the comparison between the philosophy of the Socrates and Thrasymachus. Fine. Now this is not complete yet. So this debate is going on whether the interest of the individual is supreme or the interest of the state or society is supreme. And Socrates is really finding it difficult to counter the Thrasymachus challenge, because Thrasymachus is realist. Fine. So somehow Socrates put forward the 3 questions to Thrasymachus. Fine. So write it down. Right. To counter Thrasymachus, Socrates put forward the 3 questions. Socrates put forward the 3 questions. Question number 1. Whether people should obey the laws. Fine. Second, whether he raises whether the rulers can commit mistakes and third, whether ruling is an art. Write these 3 questions. So Socrates raises 3 questions to Thrasymachus: whether people should obey the laws. Second, whether rulers make the mistake, and whether ruling is an art. Fine. So the first question I will discuss is whether rulers make mistakes. Fine. So this is the question by Socrates. Whether rulers make mistakes, and the answer by Thrasymachus is yes, rulers may make mistakes. Yes, rulers may make mistakes. Anybody can make mistakes. So rulers can also make mistakes. Right? Next you write the argument of Socrates. Argument of Socrates on Thrasymachus. The argument of Socrates on Thrasymachus. So Socrates wants to defeat Thrasymachus in the debate, and he puts certain questions which somehow Thrasymachus will get trapped. Fine. So through the Socrates we also know the art of debating. Okay, so raise the questions where the other person gets confused and get trapped. So here he is trapping the Thrasymachus and trying to show what are the contradictions in the thoughts of Thrasymachus. Fine, so he's showing the contradictions in the thoughts of Thrasymachus. Okay, so Socrates says that when rulers can make mistakes, it means in all situations justice is not the interest of the strong. Justice is not the interest of the strong, because they make mistake. Suppose a ruler brings such law. Fine, for example, I am a ruler and I increase the price of an onion, and maybe I am also a farmer, but the people may find that this is problematic and they may not give me the vote. So I am hurting my interest. So, right. Thus Socrates points that the definition of Thrasymachus is contradictory. Thus Socrates points that the definition of Thrasymachus is contradictory. Okay. Now write second point. Second question, whether rulership is an art. Right. Thrasymachus says, yes, I agree that rulership is an art. Okay. Now write, after this, Socrates tries to explain the concept of art. The concept of art. The concept of art, right? The Socrates tries to explain the concept of art, right? According to Socrates, art is not for the interest of the artist. Art is not for the interest of the artist, but for the interest of others, right? Or you can write, according to Socrates, the art of an artist is not just for the happiness of the artist, but for the happiness of the people. For the happiness of the people. Write it down. Now, art or skill, he gives other examples, right? Socrates gives the example of the doctor. Socrates gives the example of doctor, right? The skill of doctor is not for his own benefit. The skill of doctor is not for his own benefit, right? The skill of the doctor is for the benefit of his patients. The skill of the doctor is for the benefit of his patients. Fine, right? Similarly, the skill of the teacher, is not for the teacher. The skill of the teacher is not for the teacher, but for the interest of his students. But for the interest of his students. This much you have right? Right. Thus he tells that if rulership is an art, it cannot be for the interest of the artist. It cannot be for the interest of the ruler, right? It is in the interest of the people. It is interest of the people. Fine. So how good artist I am will not depend upon me making the painting and finding pleasure. So my art if it is liked by many, then I am a good artist. Similarly, if I am a ruler and my skill is just helping me and not the others, then I am not a good ruler. So more number of people I will serve better, the better ruler I will be. Fine. Now write next, the third question, whether people should obey the ruler. Whether people should obey the ruler. Again, Socrates asked this question. See, a lot of things are just to know. I will convert it into a question and answer, but you should know the evolution of the dialogue. So Thrasymachus says, yes, we should obey the ruler. Right? Right? Again, Socrates points towards the contradiction. Again, Socrates points towards the contradiction. The contradiction is when we obey the law, it is as if we are working in the interest of the king. The contradiction is when we obey the law, it is as if we are working in the interest of the king. Okay? Right? However, according to Socrates, we obey law because it is in our interest to do so. We obey law because it is in our interest to do so. Again you write, the Socrates life is an example. The Socrates life is an example of his beliefs. Okay? So again you write it down. Right? Socrates drank hemlock. Socrates drank hemlock. Right? On the basis of his belief that citizens should obey the law and the law is in their interest. The law is in their interest, and maybe we are ignorant that we think that the law is in the interest of the king. So we are ignorant, we think that law is in the interest of the king. Now Socrates is not very confident in dealing with Thrasymachus, but somehow he deals with. And what happens now is Thrasymachus leaves the place. Thrasymachus is projected as some arrogant person. He is not interested in all stupid ideas of Socrates. So he leaves it, but he says that Socrates, you will have to believe that whatever is the idea of justice, I am not concerned. You keep on finding it, but I can tell you this golden rule that the unjust persons are happier than the just persons. Fine, write it down. Right? Thrasymachus, next paragraph, right? Thrasymachus does not show any further interest in debating with Socrates. Thrasymachus does not show any further interest in debating with Socrates. Right? Thrasymachus suggests that it is of no use to understand what is justice. Right? It is of no use to understand what is justice. Okay? Right? He asserts that the life of unjust man is superior to to the life of just man. The life of unjust man is superior to the life of just man. Fine, right? He means to say that those who earn money by unfair means, those who earn money, right? It means those who earn money by any means, fair, unfair, any means, they are always in a better position. They are always in a better position than those who earn money, by fair means. Fine. So, right, normally the corrupt persons lead a good life. Normally, the corrupt persons lead good life, whereas the just persons live in poverty. So, the honest officer, you can say, faces lot of problem, and the dishonest officer, he normally has a good life. Now you write that, right? The Thrasymachus has given a new challenge to Socrates. Thrasymachus has given a new challenge to Socrates. Underline this, new challenge. Okay. Now write, what is the new challenge? What is this new challenge? Right. Now, the Socrates will not only have to define what is justice. Now, the Socrates will not only have to define what is justice, comma, he also has to prove that justice is better than injustice, or he also has to prove that just man is better than the unjust man. Fine. So now in his theory of justice, he will have to tackle two things. First, what is justice, and the second, why it is better to be just than to be unjust, because Thrasymachus has given infinite examples where those who are corrupt, they are having a happy life, and those who are honest, they are living in poverty. Okay, so I hope you have understood this story. Now we still have to see how to address this question, justice as the interest of the strong. So a lot of information I have given which we will use somewhere. Right now we have to understand that from exam's point of view, how will I write the answer, justice as the interest of the strong. So now let us see how to deal with this question. Justice is the interest of the strong. Justice is the interest of the strong. So I am not dictating in paragraph. I am just giving you points which later on you can convert into the paragraph. So first point, you will write that the above view of justice represent the sophist conception of justice. It represents the sophist conception of justice. Fine. Next, write that the sophists, right? Sophists are relativists, comma, nihilists, and believed that, you can say advocated that money and power is a source of good life. Good life. Next thing you write that for sophists, it does not matter whether money is earned by the fair or unfair means. Next point, right? Next point will be for sophists, there are no universal standards. Fine. Next you will write about Thrasymachus in the next paragraph. Thrasymachus held that justice is the idea of the strong, those who are in power define justice, and since rulers keep on changing, the idea of justice also keeps on changing. Idea of justice also keep on changing. Fine. Thus, justice is neither, next point, thus, justice is neither universal nor transcendental, it is conventional. Fine. And then you will have to write how Socrates responds. Right? Socrates finds it difficult to counter Thrasymachus because Thrasymachus gives the realist view. Fine. Then you have to write how Socrates defends his position. So you have to just summarize this. Socrates held that. Fine. So what will you write? A. What is, comma, need not to be what ought. Fine. And here again you write, thus justice is power, but it ought not to be. Second, it is wrong to think that laws are in the interest of the ruler. Next, it is wrong to think that unjust persons are happier than the just persons. Fine. And then you can write, the soul of unjust person is never at peace Next, like all arts, you have to just sum up his arguments. Like all arts, rulership is also for the welfare of the people. Fine. After this, you will have to write your analysis. How you look at Thrasymachus' view and how you look at Socrates' view. Fine. So in the next paragraph, what you say that both the perceptions, both ideas are relevant. Fine. So in the conclusion, you can say so that both the views have their own importance. Thrasymachus gives the realist view. Socrates gives the idealist view. Next, it is important to understand the both, because only when we will understand what is, we will try to end and we will try to address the defect, and hence we also need to understand what ought to be. Hence, it is not that we have to refute the Thrasymachus altogether or Socrates. We have to take the views of both the two scholars. One tells what is, the other tells what ought to be, and both the views are important. Okay, so this is how you can give your own analysis and you can conclude. So tomorrow I will continue with the idea to end, and we will try to address the defect, and hence we also need to understand what ought to be. Hence, it is not that we have to refute the Thrasymachus altogether or Socrates. We have to take the views of both the two scholars. One tells what is, the other tells what ought to be, and both the views are important. Okay, so this is how you can give your own analysis and you can conclude. So tomorrow I will continue with the idea of justice further. Thank you.